Hello and welcome to the Following Truth Bible Study. As always, I'm your host, LJ. Today we have something a little bit different for the channel. We're going to be doing a live debate between Stephen Avery and James Snapp Jr. The topic of the debate is Sinaiticus or Codex Sinaiticus a fake? Now, we need to define what that means. Basically, that means, is Sinaiticus a 4th century manuscript, or is it a later product and actually was manufactured or created in the 19th century? So this is the first debate that I've actually hosted on my channel, and I'm hoping to do these in more as the channel grows, and I'm hoping that we'll be doing more and more live debates. So if it is something that you would like to participate in, please let me know. Please send me a message, and I'll look into getting some more debates done in the future. As always, please like and subscribe to the channel. It does help, and obviously it keeps you up to date when I produce new content, new videos, or I'm going live, and obviously it'll keep you up to date when we do more debates. So the outline of this debate will be, there's going to be a 15-minute opening, and so 15 minutes for Stephen, then 15 minutes for James. Then we're going to have 30 minutes of alternating questions between Stephen and James, and that will there will be a question each, and then the person that is being asked the question will get 3 minutes in order to answer that question, or up to 3 minutes, and they can take up to 3 minutes if they want to. So it will just go from Stephen to James, and then 3 minutes in between. And then at the end, there's going to be up to 30 minutes of questions from the audience. So if you would like to send your questions in the comments, you can do that. There is no requirement for questions to be sent through Cash App. Obviously, any Cash App questions will be treated as priority, but there is no requirement for my channel that you have to do that. It's just, if you would like to do that, then they obviously would get priority at the end. So that's basically the outline of the debate. Now, we might have time at the end for, I'm happy, it depends on whether anybody else would like to stay around and actually have an after debate discussion. It's I'm more than okay with that, but that's obviously dependent on the participants of the debate, and also those that are watching. If you would like to stay and have a discussion, you are more than welcome to do that. Now, before I bring on Stephen and James into the room, and they can introduce themselves, I would like to just say congratulations to the Team USA for. I'm a big football, soccer fan, as the Americans would say. So I'd like to say congratulations to them for qualifying for the knockout round. And to my Polish friends, you're very, very lucky. So let's introduce Stephen and James. Let's, there we go. So obviously, if you would like to unmute yourselves, and you can give a minute or two introduction to yourselves. Tell us about who you are for those people that might not know you, and also, maybe a link to your website. There is a link to both Stephen's and James's website in the description. I highly recommend going to both of them. So, Stephen, if you would like to just introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Stephen Avery, over from Dutchess County, New York. I've been interested in Bible issues for about 20 years. And what happened was that Sinaiticus came up when a gentleman named Chris Pinto raised it around 2010. And I was very pro-Sinaiticus at that point. I even wrote one little article explaining why it was authentic. But I did not like the way that Chris Pinto was being treated when he raised some questions. So I listened carefully, and then I began to change my point of view. I began to understand the Simonides story about creation and what you might call the historical imperatives involved. I began to understand more about the manuscript and what had happened when Konstantin Tischendorf discovered it. And from all of that, I became sort of like one person in a small team. We call ourselves Sinaiticus Authenticity Research Team, SART, that includes David Daniels, includes a gentleman that he's not official, but he's helping us out, who will be on in a few minutes, and a couple of other people, it's Mark Mishi, and we made it our point to look into all of these evidences, to look into things that had been missed about Porphyrius Spensky, about Mazarov, about different people, and lay them all out so that the listeners could do it. Okay, that's enough, more than enough time for an introduction. I just wanted to say how I got into Sinaiticus. You can take a minute off my other time. Okay, James, you're up.
No, I think we're fine, and I give James obviously equal time there to say hello and introduce himself as well.
Hello, everybody. Hello, LJ. Thank you for having me on your channel. I am a minister at a small church in central Indiana. I study textual criticism and manuscripts as a hobby, and I've been doing it for a while.
Okay. Right. So let's bring that back. So Stephen is going to go first, saying that he is affirming that Sinaiticus is a fake, is a forgery. However, Stephen would like to define that. We'll let Stephen do that. So there, he's going to get 15 minutes. 1 minute before his time is up, you will hear a bell, and that lets you know that there is only 1 minute left, and that you need to wind up your argument. And then there will be a final bell once the 15 minutes is up. So when you are ready, Stephen, you let me know, and I will begin your time.
Okay, ready?
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to begin my time by complimenting James Snapp Jr. for some integrity positions he's actually taken on Sinaiticus. For example, when there was a phony transcription up on the Codex Sinaiticus project site, he was one of the main people who tried to get them to at least put a disclaimer up, and that was very good. When James White claimed that only people who you shouldn't listen to talked about the trash can, James Snapp, as well as myself and some others, was very strong in pointing out that the trash can story came from Tischendorf. It was not a King James Bible only thing. So I'll start with some compliments on an integrity level for James. He's not your normal pro-Sinaiticus person. I run into many who are not the most hospitable. Now, when we talk about it being a forgery, there's really three possibilities. A 4th century date that was pushed by Konstantin Tischendorf against a lot of opposition by scholars in his day, like Hilgenfeld and Uspensky. He pushed very hard for a 4th century date for his two manuscripts that were one. One was in Leipzig called the Codex Federico Augustinus, and the other one was 15 years later in St. Petersburg called Codex Sinaiticus, Petropolitanus. Okay, now he pushed for the 4th century date, and that pretty much, by the way, I might have mispronounced, I don't know that last word. He pushed for a 4th century date, Tischendorf did. Others have at times pushed for a 5th, 6th, or 7th century date, which would still be ancient. This includes Uspensky, this includes Hilgenfeld, who said it was about 6th century. This includes David Trobesch, sort of hinted that it was about 600 AD, even though he did it in a semi-public way. So the 350 AD date of Tischendorf is not universal. But if it was 350, 450, 500, it would still be authentic, although it makes a difference. Recently, Brent Nongby, a paleographic scholar from Australia, living now in Europe, he did a study on one aspect of Sinaiticus, and he tried to push the terminus ante quem, the final point, about 100 years later to 450. But again, that's not that important. So the main issue is that when Sinaiticus was found in 1844, the name of it was hidden. It was brought to Germany. It was called the Codex Federico Augustanus, and that was 43 leaves. It was 5 intact quires and 3 loose leaves, although most scholars won't tell you that it was intact quires. They like to accept the Tischendorf fabrication story that it was loose leaves. He took those 43 leaves and he went back twice to Sinai, and on the third trip in 1859, he managed to get the rest of the thing. And then there was a lot of, how did he get them? Did he steal them? Did he make a loan? That's not really that important. But he got the rest of the manuscript. Now, even while he was en route in 1859, he said in one of his letters, "Oh, I've heard about the stories that Simonides told. He was nervous about this." This was written while he was en route. Now, he didn't say specifically which stories. It's possible he was talking about something else, but it's also very, very possible that Simonides had already made it clear that what was going on in Sinai was fishy because he had worked on the manuscript there. Later, he talked to people in England. Now, it all busted open around 61, 62. It made the journals, and Simonides explained how he had worked on it. I think James might even have a lot to say about this. He explained how he had worked on it in 1839, 1840, and in Mount Athos, working with his uncle or mentor Benedict and other people, and they made this manuscript up to be a replica for the Tsar. Now, we don't know today whether that was an honest story or not. It's possible that even if the Simonides story is true, that he tinged it, that they made it up to make it look old to begin with. So we don't really know. But his story was that it was a replica for the Tsar with a nice cover page, a nice binding that was taken off at St. Catherine's. It got to St. Catherine's, and then it was extracted by Tischendorf. Now, the first fishy point about I'm going to go about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to turn over to Kurt. The first fishy point about Sinaiticus is the lack of provenance. This is a critical issue for any manuscript. Here it was supposed to be the precious, precious manuscript of Sinai, and nobody has any record of it arriving there. Nobody has a catalog, even though they claimed one, it turned out to be no such thing. Nobody has a catalog that shows it. Nobody has even a verbal record. Well, this was brought in by Sophinius, the pastor of, in 1000 AD. You have stories. You have much better provenance on all the major manuscripts like Vaticanus, Bezae, Alexandrinus. They don't necessarily go back to the beginning, but they go back hundreds of years, and they have good stories about the further back. Sinaiticus lacks all provenance, even though there were all sorts of people going there looking for manuscripts. There's one claimed quote from the 1700s, but it's weak. There is no real provenance until 1845, when 1844, when Tischendorf was there, in 1845, when Uspensky was there and reported on it. I'm going to try to get into some of Uspensky's reports because they falsify a lot of the claims about the manuscript. Okay, so this was done without provenance. That's the first one, very fishy. It has a fishy discovery story, and James will likely agree with this. Everything that Tischendorf said about how he discovered it, such as saving it by fire in a basket and being granted it as a gift, all of this was made up much later, 1859. Even his 1844 stories were made up in 1859. In 1844, he just said, "These leaves came into my possession," which is like feast talk. Look what happened. I got some leaves in my hand. That was when he wrote to his brother Julius. So everything about the story is fishy from Tischendorf. The next thing is the amazing condition of the manuscript. It's incomparable. When Helen Shenton was trying to explain about Sinaiticus in a talk in 2011, she said it was in phenomenally good condition, not just excellent condition, phenomenally good. You can see that on two videos, which we'll show you a little bit about later, that show that it coming in loose in a box in 1933, and then the English people receiving it were just running right through the manuscript as if it was yesterday's newspaper. Crinkle, 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 turn, turn, turn. It was amazing. What are they doing? This is supposed to be a precious. Manuscripts are supposed to get old in time and heat. This is what manuscript science says. But this thing was not old. They were handling it loosey-goosey. The same thing happened in a later publication, 2000 video publication, 2011. The BBC put it out, available. These are both available for anyone to see. The pages turned like new. They look beautiful. You can't really, there's no holes. There's no, and this is actually goes further than just the video. You can't really find holes in the thing, period. There's no difficulties. There's no ink turning into acid through the parchment. But more than that, it turns like a loose, flexible, supple, beautiful parchment, as if it had just come out of the box a few hundred years ago and had been lightly used. Not like it had been 400 AD, traveled around the countryside, handled by correctors, taken out twice a year for holidays, used thousands of times. There's no smudges of hand smudges around the edge, etc. The condition is simply too beautiful. So we have the provenance that it lacks, the phenomenally good condition, the fishy discovery story, and we have an amazing alternate production story, which will be a large part of our discussion tonight, of how it was made in 1840. I will not touch on that now. And then we have technical reasons why we know that this is a new manuscript, or we at least can be fairly certain. Some of them are textual. One of them I'm going to go into a little later. It's called the Three Crosses Note. But right now I'm going to turn this over to a wonderful gentleman, Kirk DiVietro, who is going to talk about another element. This is a technical aspect, just to show you that when we say that we're trying to understand all bases of this manuscript, this is not coming out of left field. We want to understand why it is the way it is as best we can. So I'm going to turn it over to Kirk. He's going to talk about a specific word that's in the Shepherd of Hermas. Now, who first noticed this word as being oddball? Somebody you might have heard of, Constantine Tischendorf, in 1856, when he was discussing the Hermas of Simonides. This is another major reason, which I forgot to tell you about, that Simonides did a Hermas before Sinaiticus, just a couple years ago, and very similar. In that Hermas, Tischendorf looked at this one word and he said, it doesn't make sense. It can't be 400 AD, native Greek, 350 AD, 4th century. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kirk and he'll explain why. And Kirk, you've got it.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve. My name's Kirk DiVietro. I'm a pastor up near Boston, and I, like James, have made textual criticism my hobby. In the past, I computerized the Greek New Testament that's the basis of the King James Bible It's used by certain Bible programs and things. And so I've been familiar with this stuff for a while. I'm new to the controversy on the age of Sinaiticus. The word that we're looking at appears in the Shepherd of Hermes, and it's in Vision 2, Sentence 3. All the information's on the slide that you're about to see. Now, I can read, brother, that's the wrong slide. We want that one. Yeah, there we go. That's the one. All right, I can read this Greek text, and it says what's there, what's transcribed. Eris de Maximo, idou thlipsis erkatai. It means, I said to Maximus, behold, tribulation is coming. The problem with Maximo is that he's not mentioned anywhere else in the Shepherd. He's a character that appears out of nowhere and goes nowhere. And it doesn't make sense to the storyline. The Greek is the alternate Greek. Let me say it that way. The alternate Greek is, and you say, there is a very extremely great tribulation about to come. Now, the extreme tribulation, or the very extreme, is what turned into maxima in Latin. It appears in the Old Palatine version of the Shepherd. You said to them, Maxim, behold the great tribulation. Okay. Dressel, one of the older critics, changed that. Thou sayest, behold, the great tribulation cometh, because he recognized that Maximo just can't be there. It just can't be there. It is the result, and a man named Jalabert surmised this, that it was originally the Greek words megale sphodra, which means a very, very great. And an early Latin translator translated that into maxima, a very great tribulation. Somebody along the line mistook that for a proper noun and translated it maximo, still to maximum. And then somebody later then translating back from Latin to Greek, whether as the primary text or he was inscribing the Greek, and he said, I remember Maximo. Somebody brought that back into the Greek and put it down. That's how it appears in the Shepherd of Hermes that's attached to the Sinaiticus manuscript. Now, I come to three conclusions, and I'll be very quick about it. My first conclusion is it could be that Sinaiticus followed a very faulty manuscript. If you read the Greek of the Sinaiticus, it is full of errors and full of corrections. I'll hurry. Someone made a mistake in the transmission, and then other people just kept copying it over again, and the scribe of Aleph or Sinaiticus didn't pick it up and included it. And finally, it's possible Sinaiticus has the right meaning. Then we ought to take Sinaiticus, which stands against all other textual evidence, as the primary text of the Bible. I don't think any of those work. But anyhow, that word Maximo causes a lot of questions. With that, I'll turn it back to Steve.
Thank you, Kirk. Wonderful job, and I'll close up. Oh, okay. 1 minute.
Okay.
What I want to share is that this was one part of a large exposition, first by Tischendorf, which was repeated by Jalabert and Lycurgus, and then later it was picked up by James Donaldson. They pointed out many elements that made Hermas and Barnabas appear to be a later text. We just took this one partly because it's a lot of fun, and also because it was emphasized by Tischendorf himself before he knew about Sinaiticus. Later on, he tried to retract, but he never retracted the arguments. So that whole history of Hermes, the very fact that Sinaiticus did a very similar Hermes before this was discovered in Sinai, was a coincidence almost too great to bear, according to James Anson Farrar. Then when we find out that linguistically, the case is very strong that Hermes and Barnabas are middle-aged retroversions, has to be considered. I will now turn over the mic to LJ and James.
Okay, right. So there was a bit of extra time there, which obviously I will give James as well. There was a slight problem initially because I was on mute and you actually didn't hear the first spell that I actually played, so I had to put that. So James already had an extra minute on top of that. So actually James is going to get nearly about 18 and a half minutes for his opening, just to make up for the time difference that obviously went on there. So James, you are going to get I will give you the full time that you've been allotted there. So you'll get around about 18 and a half minutes to present your and I've got your slides here as well. So obviously just let me know when you would like me to do those, and I'll keep myself off of mute so that you can actually hear the bell when I play it. Right, let's put you on solo. And you are on mute.
Go ahead and bring up the slides. For those that are new to this topic, what is Codex Sinaiticus? It is a Greek manuscript that contains most of the Old Testament, most of the Apocrypha in the Septuagint, most of the New Testament, the Book of Barnabas, and part of another book called The Shepherd of Hermas, about the first third. And images of this book are online, page views of the manuscript. Now, Constantine Tischendorf is the researcher who discovered part of Codex Sinaiticus at St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Peninsula in May 1844. He took part of it to Germany. This portion was first called Codex Frederico Augustinus, named after Frederick, King of Saxony, who financed Tischendorf's travels. And by the way, ignore what James White has written about Tischendorf and Sinaiticus. He seems determined to mix up the facts and then fail to correct them. In February of 1859, Tischendorf was at Sinaiticus again. Tischendorf was at St. Catherine's Monastery again, supported this time by Alexander, the Emperor of Russia. He was presented with many more pages of the same manuscript he'd seen in 1844. And he even wrote about this encounter. This manuscript is what has become known as Codex Sinaiticus. Now, it's usually pronounced by Americans Sinaiticus, but it should be Sinaiticus. Anyway, he released a sample of his script in 1860, and the full contents were published in 1862 in a special Greek font that resembled the handwriting of the copyist. And that's about when Constantine Simonides comes into the picture. In a letter that was published in The Guardian on September 3rd, 1862, and earlier by other means, but especially in The Guardian, Simonides claimed that he had made Codex Sinaiticus in 1839 through 1841 at Mount Athos. Mount Athos is an important monastery center in Greece. Simonides claimed that after finishing this large project, he donated it to a retired church leader named Constantius, whose home was on the Greek island of Antigonus. Constantius, in turn, now remember, this is all claimed by Simonides. Constantius is claimed to have sent a contribution to Simonides and then donated the Codex to St. Catherine's Monastery. And that is how its pages turned up there in 1844, when its pages were first encountered by Tischendorf. Not all of them, but some of them. Simonides also claimed that he himself had visited St. Catherine's Monastery in 1844 and 1852 and had seen the Codex there. Yet another scholar, Uspensky, visited St. Catherine's Monastery in 1845 and obtained some fragments of the same manuscript and described the main portion as a bound manuscript. So sometime between the time Tischendorf saw it and the time Uspensky saw it, the monks had bound at least part of the manuscript. After Simonides' claims were taken into consideration and analyzed in the Journal of Sacred Literature, LJ, I think you have the link to that volume. Nobody took them seriously anymore because it was obvious that Simonides was a liar and was guilty of multiple counts of fraud. Now let's look at some slides. Here you see claims. Well, I think we're missing the first slide. Maybe we'll get back to that one later. But here is Simonides' claim about what his plan was for making the manuscript. It was supposed to be a gift to the Emperor of Russia, Nicholas I. And there you see him saying, "I myself determined to begin the work." Next slide. Here are links to where I've covered this subject earlier on my blog. And I go into a lot more detail in writing here in these vlogs than we'll probably be able to do in conversation. But anybody who wants to look into it more can simply follow these links to the post where I go into more detail. Next slide. Here we see somebody's claim about where he got the text to make the contents of the manuscript. He claims that his uncle, taking a copy of the Moscow edition by the Zosima group editors, really they were more like presiders over the editors. He claims that his uncle collated that text with the ancient ones, after which he gave it to my hand to transcribe. And by the ancient ones for the Septuagint, that would be Codex Alexandrinus, which has been around for a long time, ever since 1627. But that is what he claims as the basis for this text, that his uncle began with the Zosima edition and collated it with others, and then gave it to him to transcribe. Next slide. Somebody's also made this claim about where he got the parchment. He said that he got the parchment from an ancient book, and he goes into more detail in the passage we see here. I will avoid that right now for the purpose of time, but you can see the details that he gives. He says, "I therefore took possession of this book. First, I copied out the Old and New Testaments, then the Epistle of Barnabas, the first part of the pastoral writings of Hermas." So Simonides claimed to have written the Old and New Testaments and the Epistle of Barnabas and the first part of the pastoral writings of Hermas with his own hand. I copied it out. That's what he said. Next. Now, Simonides claimed that he ran out of parchment after transcribing the first part of the Scripture of Hermas. If he had read what Tischendorf said about the manuscript Tischendorf had discovered, he would have known that, like anybody else who could read Tischendorf's writing, he would have known that Tischendorf had said, this contains the text of Hermas up to here, which is only about the first third or so. Simonides claimed that the transcription of the remaining apostolic writings he declined to write down because the supply of parchment ran short. This is key, and this demonstrates that Simonides is lying through his teeth. He claimed that he had written all of the Old Testament, all of the New Testament himself, and Barnabas, that's the book of Barnabas, and the first part of the Scripture of Hermas, and then he ran out of parchment. Okay, next slide. Now, in that letter that he claimed to have received from Patriarch Constantius. Now, this is what Constantine Simonides claimed. This is his claim. He claimed to have received this letter from Constantius that said that the manuscripts contained the Old and New Testaments, together with the Epistle of St. Barnabas and the first part of the pastoral writings of Hermas, bound in one volume. So this was Simonides' claim. Now notice the time frame involved. We're talking about a big manuscript. This is the Old Testament, the New Testament, the apocryphal books, and Barnabas and Hermas. Now, this would all take a very long time to write. So, by Simonides' own description of it, he can't have been doing anything, a whole lot of anything else if he was to make this manuscript. It's people that have tried writing this much would know that this is basically a superhuman task that he's describing. But of course, Simonides presented himself as having this superhuman ability with calligraphy. But notice the time frame. It's conceived, thought about in late 1839, and by August of 1841, he's got it done and he's given it to his friend. Next slide. Now, when he writes to the Guardian in 1863, Simonides restates and says more emphatically, I know that I wrote 1,205 pages in 8 months and ceased from the work only because the skins failed. In other words, because he ran out of parchment. He couldn't write any more of the Book of Hermas because there wasn't any more parchment in the book from which he got the parchment. So Simonides was making this claim, and he invited people to, well, I'll prove it to you if you first deposit 10,000 pounds sterling in my name, and so forth. Next slide. Now, what you see here is a grid I made of the text of Hermas. The part that you see there in yellow, that is the part that Tischendorf found. The two other parts in light blue and lighter blue, those are parts that came up in 1975. They were among the new finds. Now, Tischendorf didn't know about this, and neither did Simonides. But Simonides is the guy that says he wrote the manuscript. These two pages, or these two sections rather, that we have found among the new finds, demonstrate that Simonides was lying. If Simonides had actually made the manuscript like he said, he would not have said he ran out of parchment. He would have said, wait a minute, part of that book that I wrote is missing. Because among the new finds were these pages from after halfway through and very near the end, from chapter 93. Next slide. Here we see a page from the Sacred Hermas, chapter 93, found among the new finds of St. Catherine's Monastery. Now, Shepherd Hermas has 114 chapters, so there's no way that anybody who had written the manuscript would have said, I ran out of parchment when I wrote the first third. Only a forger, a liar, like Simonides was, would have said such a thing. These pages prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Simonides' claim was false, and that makes Simonides a liar, so there's no reason at all to keep on imagining or excusing ourselves for whatever reasons to think that he was telling the truth. Simonides was a known liar. He was a forger. He was a counterfeiter. Shepherd Hermas has, going back, 114 chapters. When the manuscript was made, the whole text of Hermas was here. But Simonides only knew about what Tischendorf had told him about. Neither he nor Tischendorf knew that that there were more pages existing until, well, they both died. But in 1975, more pages were discovered, proving that Simonides was lying. Because why would a person who had written text from chapter 93 had said, "Oh, I ran out of parchment after I wrote that first part"? Nobody would. only a liar would say such a thing. Next slide. Also, as if that's not proof enough, if we look in the Sinaiticus, Codex Sinaiticus, we see lettering reinforcement. Now, reinforcement is what is sometimes done to old manuscripts when the lettering begins to fade. So another copyist will come and retrace over the letters to make them more readable. Now, here we see some reinforced lettering. Now, in Simonides' world, a brand new manuscript arrived at St. Catherine's Monastery in 1841. And in Simonides' world, by no later than 1845, this happened. Reinforced lettering on a manuscript that was not yet 20 years old. Now also notice somebody's written an Arabic note on this page. Now, it'd be possible, I suppose, for scribes at St. Catherine's Monastery between 1841 and 1859 to put an Arabic note in there for whatever reason. But why would they go over one page and reinforce the lettering like this and not another page? It simply makes Simonides' claims preposterous, because there are many other pages on which there is no such reinforcement. So why on this page and not all the others? In the real world, it's explained because manuscripts get damaged, and that damage, an attempt has to be made to repair it. But in Simonides' world, that makes no sense. Next. Here is another page of reinforced lettering in Codex Sinaiticus from Isaiah 54. You can see here on this page the old lettering, and if you can zoom in on that, the reinforced lettering, where a later copyist has traced over the old lettering. Again, there'll be no reason at all to do this if the manuscript was brand new in 1841. Again, Codex Sinaiticus is shown to be ancient, and Constantine Simonides is shown to be a liar. Next. Here we see on another page the reinforced lettering, and I picked this page because it's very, very vivid. You can see the ancient lettering in the right-hand column, and on the other columns you can see the reinforced lettering, where a later scribe has gone over and reinforced lettering, traced over it. You can also see a correction made at the bottom of the page. And again, why would anyone do this if the manuscript was brand new in 1841? They wouldn't. Simonides is shown to be a liar, a fraud, a counterfeiter, a thief, and a forger. Well, actually, the forgeries, that involves some other things, but we'll get to that in a minute. Next slide. Sinaiticus also has a large leftover space between two copies series of assigned books. Perhaps we can get back to this later. Next slide. Simonides claimed to have begun writing these texts and finished by 1841, but the manuscript is heavily damaged at its beginning. You have hardly any of Genesis. The entire book of Exodus is gone. Only chapters 20 through 22 of Leviticus exist. Only 5 chapters of Deuteronomy. What you see here. Next slide. Again, it's supposed to have been brand new in 1841. Also includes cancel sheets written by Scribe D. How does he account for this when he said he alone, he was the writer? When you see these pages written by other scribes who did not write the pages that came before and after him, you can't. This again shows Simonides was lying. Next page. Now, Simonides said that in 1852 he saw the manuscript at St. Catherine's Monastery. Now, also here, notice that he claimed to have seen there. Well, we'll get back to this forgeries later. Next slide. Simonides had a career as being a fraudster. A person who would take some old things and mix them in with frauds that he had made, with forgeries. You can see this in his book called Facsimiles of Certain Portions of the Gospel, etc. Simonides was a proven demonstrable forger. Next slide. We'll skip this for now. Keep this handy, LG. We'll go back to it. Next slide. Now, in 1856, Simonides had been arrested. Now, this is before Tischendorf had found the main part of Codex Sinaiticus. This is why Simonides wanted to besmirch Tischendorf's reputation by embarrassing him in this way, momentarily, because Tischendorf had been instrumental in exposing Simonides' earlier attempt to make a lot of money by defrauding, that is, robbing some scholars in Prussia. When Tischendorf had exposed Simonides his fakery, his forgery, then that's why Simonides then had a reason to attempt to draw Tischendorf's reputation into question by saying this ridiculous claim about the Codex. So his motive is simple. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, well, that's our time up for our openings. So we've gone through that now. Next, we are going to have up to 30 minutes. 22, 17. We're going to have up to 30 minutes of questions from Stephen to James, and then James to Stephen. So it's alternate questions, and you get up to 3 minutes to answer the question. If you don't use the 3 minutes, then obviously we'll get more questions in. But obviously you can take the full 3 minutes if you feel like that's what you would like to do. So the first question is going to come from Stephen to James, and then James will get 3 minutes to answer the question, and then it'll be James to ask a question of Stephen, and Stephen will then get up to 3 minutes to answer that question. And we'll just keep going until we get through 30 minutes. So let me start again. So, Stephen, if you'd like to unmute yourself, and then what I'll do is I will allow you to get on and ask the questions and answer.
Okay, hello. Could you put up my little slide? Don't have very many, but the one on the 3 crosses note, because I want to ask James about that. Okay.
Okay, bear with me 1 second. So I need to swap over the slides.
There we go. Leave it up. That's good.
Is it that one?
Yep, you got it. The 3
Okay.
crosses note is a note where there was a duplicate section, and the note says in English, when it's translated, at the sign of the 3 crosses is the end of the 7 leaves, which are superfluous and not part of Ezra. Would you agree, James, that this is a type of note that a scriptorium or a monastery or a couple of scribes working together would place? In fact, they would probably try to fix it. But would you agree that this has the feel and sound of a scriptorium note? That's my question.
Yes. One moment, please. I think this is covered by. I don't know if y'all see this, but in this book, D.C. Parker goes into this note in detail. Christoph Lake also did. So it is certainly recognized by Christoph Lake at the beginning of the 1900s, and more recently by D.C. Parker as being a note by the scribes who made the Codex.
Senator, could you repeat what they said, Christoph Lake and David Parker? Could you say that again?
Yes. Christoph Lake, when he photographed the manuscript in the early 1900s, and D.C. Parker, more recently, have both affirmed this note represents the work of the scribes who made the Codex.
That it does represent the scribes who made the Codex, correct?
Well, hold on. I can look it up if you want to use the time.
You still have a minute and a half to answer the question, so you have time.
Cursup Lake did not discuss that in 1911. I haven't been able to get his 1922. I can tell you what Parker says, and if you wait a minute, I have it.
Okay.
Well, and while he's looking, I'll speak for a minute until he's ready. I might have the David Parker section myself handy. He has a long explanatory note, and he says it's by a later corrector, so I can save you a little bit of time. The long explanatory note goes into how the pages were in the wrong place, but he does not really date the note. And my question to you is, why would somebody hundreds of years later start to try to get into the mind of the writers of the scriptorium? Doesn't it have the feel of a scriptorium note? That's my question. Without checking what different people say, that's not so important. Most of them don't touch on this issue even at all. So my question to you is, isn't it natural to accept this as a scriptorium note? That's my question. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to cover 2 notes based on what Parker says. On Parker page 81. The colophon, or the scribal note, to Esther says, collated against an extremely old copy, corrected in the hand of the holy martyr Pamphilus. This would be a guy who died in 312. At the end of this very old book, which begins with the first book of Kingdoms and ends at Esther, is the signature in its signature form of Pamphilus himself, reading thus: corrected from and corrected against the hexapla of origin as corrected by himself. Antoninus the confessor collated, I, Pamphilus, corrected the volume in prison, with the great favor and enlargement of God. And if it is not too much to say, a copy to match this one would not be easy. Now going back to the other note, the one with the 3 crosses, that's referring to a part of Sinaiticus in which part of the text is duplicated. And that's all.
Okay. You get so James. You now need to you get to ask a question of Stephen. You can continue on as you want. You can continue on the discussion if you want to ask a question that relates to this, or you can obviously ask something completely different. It's up to you.
Okay. I'll go on with what I was going to ask, but maybe we can revisit the subject of those duplicated pages next. But for now, Stephen, how do you explain Constantine Simonides saying, I ran out of parchment, when in real life, Codex Sinaiticus had more pages of Hermas up to chapter 93?
Good question. I would say that at times, Simonides said what seemed convenient at the moment. He knew about the fact that the only Hermas that had been discovered was the first 1/3 or 30%. And there are other possible explanations, but I'm very comfortable with the fact that Simonides at times said what was convenient to his debate. This includes, for example, when he said, I did the work, but in another place, this was the question you pointed up, he said he talked all about how Benedict has spent years preparing this work. So at one point he might make it sound like it was a cooperative venture at Athos. Another point he may say that it was him. Now, when you get to the Hermes sheets, I would be very possible that he said what was convenient based on what was discovered, because he didn't want to make a big issue out of it. He might have even have known that he didn't do that. I think a more important question is, why did a major part of Hermes disappear? There's no indication from Uspensky, who saw the manuscript. He only said that Hermes was in it. This was 1845 and 1840 and 1850. But he said Hermes was in this manuscript. Then we turn around, and when it's published, there's only 1/3 of Hermas. Now, Hermas was a very awkward situation for Tischendorf because of the linguistic problem that he had attacked it to begin with. In addition, Callinicos said that some of the markings of Simonides were in Hermas. So I would say that a much more germane question is, how do we explain the disappearance of Hermas when it seems likely that it was intact in 1845 and 1850 when seen by Uspensky? I believe that the most sensible explanation is that Tischendorf felt that Hermas was too uncomfortable since he had attacked it rather strongly as a Latin retroversion. So he reduced his vulnerability by eliminating it, and it ended up in the back room, in the dump room that we later called the New Finds. Okay? But to answer your question, if your point is that perhaps perhaps Simonides actually lied about where he stopped and why, okay. If we're going to disqualify Simonides or Tischendorf for lying, then they're both disqualified. Tischendorf made huge fabrication about saving the leaves from fire. Does that mean that he didn't find a manuscript? No, he could have found a manuscript. Simonides might have fudged a couple of parts. His story is essentially ironclad, most of it, at least strong. But if you can find a couple of weaknesses where he stretched or made a
Well,
mistake or
he did
lied,
more than stress her, Stephen.
go ahead, you got it. Go ahead, you're on.
Okay. So next question back from Stephen to James.
Well, I'm going to defer. I'll let James ask me now because James, I have a few spots, but I'm curious to hear. He wants to say very specifically what a terrible liar. Oh, wait, I will take a point. When you say that Simonides was a liar and a forger and a this and a that, won't you recognize the following 3 stages of Simonides? He worked on a manuscript and other manuscripts in 1840, 1841. It's documented at Mount Athos. It's documented in the Lambro catalog. He worked on them with Benedict and Callinicos, directly with Callinicos, that they worked on manuscripts. So this was the first stage. He was a young teenager. We don't know his exact age. So what did he do there? He was not a forger at that point. He's been accused of various things, but he was not a forger. He was just a young person. He was not a textual scholar. Okay? So when you talk about the Simonides who might have worked on the manuscript, it has nothing to do with the allegations of forgery and anti-Protestantism and this and that came up in 1845, 1850, 1855, and 1858, 60. Let's assume that he was a forger in those areas. I don't know for sure. Some of the accusations are probably true. But they have nothing to do with what he did when he was 15 years old. Absolutely nothing. Basically nothing. And the third stage is 1859, when he first began to talk about the manuscript, to 1864, when he stopped, which is an interesting question. In those 5 years, he was talking about something that had no gain for him.
Stephen, you are meant to be asking a question of James here. So.
Do you agree that the 3 stages of Simonides' life should be looked at independently? 1, what he did as a youth. 2, his time of travel where he was accused of forgery here and there. And 3, when he talked about Sinaiticus and he had nothing to gain financially because it would be a worthless manuscript, and he had to talk about what happened 25 years back. Do you agree that we should separate out those 3 stages? That's my question.
Okay. Number 1, as far as what he did as youth, we only have his word to take for it because there wasn't a whole lot of other areas where we can verify to prove or disprove anything. The second thing is he was a well-known foister of forgeries. But the way he made forgeries was he would take a little bit of things that were real and mix in the forgery. Like when he was trying to cheat the scholars in Germany, Prussia, by saying he had this very ancient piece of palimpsest and was trying to convince them that it was ancient. He got material that really was ancient and tried to make it look even more ancient. Very rarely do you find a forger who wants to sell something that is that's brand new. The way you make a forgery successful is take something that's really old and make it look even older. So there's no doubt that Simonides was involved in some very real manuscripts. But this case is one where the case at hand is one in which he was simply offering a case that was altogether made up. So yes, of course, sort out the things that he did that were worthwhile and the things that he did that were completely bogus. But the claim that he made about Codex Sinaiticus was completely bogus. LJ, do you have my slide 24? I'd like to bring this up about Uspensky. LJ, do you have slide 24? LJ, do you have slide 24?
Yep, I'm just finding it now. Give me 2 seconds. And so this is slide. Is it this? So is it this one or?
Nope. Yes.
This one?
Yes. Go back. Go back. Yes, that. The reason why Uspensky said that Hermas was in Codex Sinaiticus was because Uspensky had found this piece that the arrow is beside. It's not part of the main codex. It's a fragment that Uspensky found there at St. Catherine's Monastery. He took this piece back to St. Petersburg, and that's where it is now. Now, in finding this piece, Uspensky could see, hey, this lines up with Hermas. But that's not the same as saying that it was part of the codex that the Tischendorf found. And going back to what Constantine Simonides had claimed, hold on a second. Stephen, you said that Simonides might have said some things that weren't true when it seemed convenient. Now, surely, if a person had written a manuscript in which the text of Hermas had stopped at where he said it stopped, then he would have said, I stopped there. He wouldn't have said, oh, should have been more. That would have been what a person who really written would have said. No, I wrote more of it. Well, the claims from 1975 show there was much, much more when it was made. In Constantine Simonides' make-believe world, the world that came out of nothing but his own head, there was no more text of Hermas after the part that Tischendorf had presented in the manuscript in 1859. That was all that Simonides knew about the manuscript. That was why he said that. It was not convenient. It was bogus.
Okay. James, time for a question to Stephen.
Stephen, because Simonides claimed to have written the whole manuscript from beginning to end himself, why would he do this when we see that obviously this is the work that everybody that's seen the manuscript can tell that there was multiple scribes at work? When you see the different handwriting of Scribe D, for instance, it's abysmally bad compared to what Scribe A does. You also see the things I mentioned before, the cancel sheets, the replacement pages, where you can see these pages at the end of Mark, for instance, and the beginning of Luke, were not made by the same scribe who wrote what came before and after. In the case of Simonides writing as if it was made by one person, that's what he said. But in real life, these pages were made by somebody else. How do you explain this? I would explain by saying, well, it's explained by Constantine Simonides lying. How do you explain this, but maintaining that Simonides told the truth?
Okay. Thank you, James. I will get to your question in a second, but I need to correct something from what you said about Uspensky. You say that Uspensky mentioned Hermas because of that fragment, but if you read Uspensky in translation, and our team was the ones who first got this translation done. It was not done by any of the Sinaiticus scholars. He said the following: the first manuscript containing the Old Testament, which was incomplete, and the entire New Testament with the Epistle of St. Barnabas and the Book of Hermas, was written on the finest white parchment on the fourth share of a long and a wide sheet. He wrote that from about his 1845 visit in a book that was published in 1856, before the discovery of Sinaiticus. He wrote very clearly let's just leave it at that. He wrote very clearly that it was part of the Old Testament and the whole New Testament and Barnabas and Hermas. He did not need to have that. He was looking at the actual manuscript. It was not a question of his finding a little, bookmark or something or fragment. It was because he saw the book intact in 1845 and 1850. Now, to your question, there's two parts to this question. I'm prepared for one of them. First of all, the idea that this was a one-man procedure was not even really stated by Simonides. He mentioned other people like Theophylact and maybe Dionysius as having worked at least on the corrections. When he talked about Benedict, he said, having removed to Mount Athos in 1810 for the sake of retirement and embraced the monastic life of the monastery of Espigmenos, he was named Benedict, and I'll skip a little bit here, or Bessarion. While at Athos, he kept himself up particularly to the study of the sacred scriptures. He collected the most ancient manuscripts of both testaments and of their commentators, and at considerable expense prepared the work for the press. So there was multiple takes on creating Sinaiticus. It was not an offhand job. If Simonides, 20 years after the fact, gave himself a little bit more credit than he deserved for what he did when he was there, he did a lot of scribal work on it. He didn't really prepare it. He wasn't the only scribe, and he made himself a little bit more important because then he made a challenge: pay me 10,000 thalers and I can do so many pages again. It's all pretty irrelevant. We know as a simple fact that he referenced other people who worked on it, and he referenced the extensive decade-long background of Benedict in preparation. So it was not an offhand job of his. I'd like you, though, to accept that correction about Uspensky. So,
Okay.
Okay.
So but I've lost Stephen's question to James now. So
okay.
you can continue on. I have been a little bit generous on the time because of the length of time that it's been taken to actually ask the questions. So I've been giving a little bit of extra leeway on the response time, purely on the basis that it seems like you're having a bit more of a conversation than just purely questions. So,
okay. LJ, can we see slide 6 again?
Let me remove my.
Can we see slide 6? Slide 6. Number 6, please. Yes.
The one before, yeah, that one has.
Okay, maybe it was 5 or 4. Yes, let's read his claim. So now remember, this is a letter that Simonides put in print. First, I copied out Again, let's say it together. I copied out the Old and New Testaments, then the Epistle of Barnabas, the first part of the pastoral writings of Hermas in capital letters, and so forth. The transcription of the remaining apostolic writings, however, I declined because the supply of parchment ran short. So, Simonides, having learned from Tischendorf what the manuscript contained, this is what Simonides claimed in writing. First, I copied out. Let's say it together. First, I copied out the Old and New Testaments, then the Epistle of Barnabas, the first part of the pastoral writings of Hermas, and then I stopped because the supply of parchment ran short. A real person who had written out all of Hermas would have said, wait a second, I don't know why Tischendorf only brought back a third, because I wrote all of the book. That is what a person who had really written the whole book would have said. But Simonides only said, I declined because the supply of parchment ran short, or as we see on another slide, because the skins failed. That is what you say when you agree with what you read, but not what you say if you actually written the entire book. That which proves that Simonides did not write the entire book, which proves, again, like I said, Simonides is a liar. Stephen, how do you explain, without calling Simonides a liar, these lies?
Well, again, I'll just repeat myself again. Let's just take the fact that Simonides said what was convenient there and lied.
But it wasn't convenient.
But yes.
If I may, the convenient thing to say would be, hey, I wrote the whole book. That would be the convenient thing to say if it was true, right?
Okay.
Right or wrong? Why would that not be the obvious thing to say?
Let me know when you're done asking the question, and I'll answer.
Okay, here's my question. Why, if Simonides had written the entire book of Hermas, would he have not said, hey, I don't know why Tischendorf has only given me a third of the book, but I know that I wrote the entire book. Instead of saying, oh, I ran out of parchment at that point. That's why it's not there.
Assuming he remembered what happened 25 years earlier, 22, and he said what was convenient, or he lied, that would not mean there's what they call the fallacy of composition. His general story was true, but if you say, oh, I caught him in a lie over there, or saying what's convenient, if you use that fallacy, then you have to disqualify everything that Tischendorf said about the manuscript, because he made a brazen lie that 43 leaves that he stole, 5 full quires and 3 other leaves that he abstracted, either one, out of the manuscript. He said that he had saved them from fire. It was a vainglorious lie that he created. Now, does that disqualify him as possibly the discovery of Sinaiticus? No. Let me finish. That doesn't disqualify the possibility that Tischendorf told some truths. And the fact that Simonides fudged that one minor issue about where Hermas stopped doesn't, by the fallacy of composition, you can't say, oh, that means that everything in his story is a lie. Doesn't work that way. Most of his story is verifiable. Wait, let me just finish. A lot of his story is verifiable. For example, the Lambro catalog of 1895 and 1900 verified that he worked with those men on manuscripts at Athos, which people had denied. Now you take over. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, the subject is not, was Constantine Tischendorf a pillar of integrity, and was his story totally true? That's not today's topic. The topic is Codex Sinaiticus a fake? Is Constantine Simonides a liar? And everything about his story does not add up. And I'm trying to get across that a person who had made a manuscript with the entire text of Hermas in it would not have said, oh, I stopped right here because the skins failed. a person who had actually written the manuscript only in 1841 would have said, when I wrote the manuscript, I had written this entire book, because we have, among the new finds, much more of Hermas from chapter 93. By having chapter 93 there, we can see that when the manuscript was made, the skins had not failed at that point. The skins had gone on to include chapter 93, which is almost the whole book. So Simonides, in writing in 1863, would have said, I wrote the whole book of Hermas, but much of it is missing. 2/3 of it is missing. But that's not what Simonides said. You're trying to say he forgot what he wrote? That's preposterous. Preposterous.
No, I didn't say he forgot it. I said, assuming that he remembered it and he spoke what.
Okay, that is the 30 minutes up. I did allow at the end, rather than like the little question, than the questions, I just allowed you to actually go back and forth because you were kind of doing that yourself. So I just kind of allowed you to do that. So that is kind of basically the end of the questions part. We did say that we were going to do a 5-minute close. If you want to do that, there hasn't been too many questions in the chat, so we don't really have too much to worry about on questions unless they start coming in now at the end of the time. If you would like to ask a question, you can do so now. Like I said at the beginning, there is no requirement to do it through Cash App, but obviously any Cash App ones will be prioritized, but we haven't got that many anyway, so it doesn't matter. Would you like to have the 5 minutes each to just to finish off your statements, and then we'll get into any questions that we do get from the audience. If we don't get any, then if you want to continue on the discussion between yourselves, I'm more than happy for you to do that.
Sure.
But if you want to take your 5 minutes to close out.
Yes, if we could use my 5 minutes to go back and look at some of the slides we did not get to earlier.
Of course, yeah, you can do that. You can take whatever you want to do for your 5 minutes. So as Stephen, actually, it is your 5 minutes first, and then it will be James afterwards. So
Okay.
The time is, bear with me 1 second. Let me just get the stopwatch, reset that. And I am going to be strict on this. We are going to go 5 minutes, 5 minutes exactly. I have allowed it to go a little bit over times at times because you've been discussing. So, but we'll stick to just 5 minutes on this. Okay.
Okay.
So this is Stephen's 5 minutes.
Thank you. We have not discussed the wonderful issue of the coloring and the staining of the manuscript, the two parts being very different in England and in Leipzig. Maybe we'll somehow get to that another day. I mentioned the 3 crosses note. I want to explain the significance very quickly. If it's accepted that this is a scriptorium note, which it pretty obviously is, it would not have been placed in hundreds of years later, but it makes no sense at all. It's an absurd idea. Then we have falsified the whole 4th century because the script itself is in fact upright Agabal majuscule. It's really dated to about 700 AD, give or take, depending on who you talk to, 600, 700 AD. That note itself changes the terminus post quem of Sinaiticus to about 600 or 700 AD and makes every theory of why it's 4th century basically falsified. And nobody has really discussed this in scholarship circles. I'll try to put a paper up on this in the next couple of days and just trying to dot some I's and cross some T's. And my point there is that the whole 4th century thing is phony baloney. Now, if we agree that the terminus post quem is 700, then 1800 becomes that much more of a realistic, because the 700 is quite unviable for a number of reasons, which I won't go into. Now, I'll just finish up by saying, beyond the coloring, beyond Maximo, beyond the 3 crosses note, we have the lack of provenance. We have the incredible coincidence of the Simonides Hermas We have the linguistic attack on that by Tischendorf to begin with, that it was an older than 4th century. We have its amazing condition, unparalleled, turns like yesterday's newspaper, wonderful. We have the fishy discovery story. We have the alternate production story, which holds up quite well, not perfect, as James points out, but quite well. We have the Lambro catalog that substantiates where Simonides and Callinicos and Benedict worked together at Athos at exactly the right time. What a coincidence. We have Morozov, the Russian scholar in 1907, I believe it is, saying that this is not an old manuscript. I looked at it. It doesn't have the grind. It's no way it's more than maybe 600 years old. It's not an ancient manuscript. He had no horse in the race. He didn't even mention Simonides. He might not have known. He just looked at the manuscript, and he was a scientist, a polymath, and he said, not that old. We had the fact that Simonides had nothing to gain on this. The revenge idea is quite weak. We have the impossible knowledge that Simonides and Callinicos had. To give you one example, and I'll stop with this, I think I'll be almost done. Callinicos said, when he talked about it, how Tischendorf had stolen the manuscript in 1844. Nobody knew about that. Nobody wrote about that. How did he know that? Because he was there at the manuscript and somebody told him, or he saw it, one or the other. And there's a lot of impossible knowledge about that, about the manuscript's history that come from Simonides and Callinicos that support their story and are far more important than whether Simonides might have fudged something. Let's assume that Simonides said some things that were wrong. So did Tischendorf. That's a washout. We have to then look at the nuts and bolts, the facts on the ground of the story, and they favor Simonides as part of a Mount Athos team creating the manuscript circa 1840. I think is my time? Yeah.
Thank you. You have 1 minute. Still.
Okay. The condition is absolutely amazing. Can you show those 2 videos? I mean, you won't show the videos, just a picture of them that people will try to track them down. These 2 videos came out in 1933 and in 2011, and they show Simonides. That's it. And they're available on the internet. You can go to me and ask me where it is, or you can try to read that. These videos show that this was not an ancient manuscript that had been in the hot desert sun, losing its suppleness for 1,700 years, or at least 1,500 in the sun, in the hot, not the sun, but the hot, dry weather. No, it wasn't. This was a recent manuscript. The ink never created an acid reaction on the paper. Oh, I'll finish with this. James asked about some areas where the ink was reinforced. That means nothing if it's not worldwide. All it means is that some weak ink was put on deliberately or not, because you have other places where the ink looks like it's brand new. So what does a couple of pages that got reinforced has no actual pizzazz. What's important is 100 pages where that ink looks new. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Okay. So, James, I know you want to go to your slides, so give me 1 second. Let me just bring your slides up, and I will reset the time. Number 6 is this one.
Before that, right here again is
okay.
Yes.
I'll just start your time now. Okay.
Okay. Again, Simonides claimed in writing that he did not write beyond the first part of Hermes because the supply of parchment ran short. Next slide. Next. He claimed in writing that he wrote 1,205 pages in 8 months and ceased because the skins failed. He thought the manuscript ended after a third of Hermes because the skins failed, because that's what he had read about the manuscript. He did not know there was more. If he had really written it, he would have said so. Next. Next. Yes. Simonides has a large leftover space. Now, this is something the scribes would do. Somebody writing the manuscript by himself had no motive to do this. These are two different scribes' work. The handwriting is by one scribe on one page, by another scribe on the next page. Next. Okay, no, go back. We see on the exit pages it's in good condition, but on the pages that we don't see, it's not. The entire book of Exodus is gone. Only chapters 22 and 22 of Leviticus are there. Only 5 chapters of Deuteronomy are there. Only 2 chapters of Joshua are there. It is not pristine, obviously. Almost all of the Pentateuch is gone. Next. Also, we have these cancel sheets, replacement sheets. Inexplicable in Simonides' story, but very easily explained with the real story, in which it's made in a scriptorium in the 4th century. Next. Simonides said he saw the manuscript himself, and here we have an example of his frauds that he was trying to sell in Europe and England. He said he had found all these other things, all on Egyptian papyrus of the 1st century. Next. He tried to pass off these things that he had made as if they were actual documents. Also, he was opposed to the TR. When he was trying to sell his frauds, he was saying that, in the received version, in the Textus Receptus, those are in Matthew 28, verse 8 and 9, and the TR is very defective. And yet we see King James only activists trying to use Simonides from their side, even though he himself was opposing the TR. Simonides advocated rejecting multiple readings in the TR on the grounds that a different reading was found in his papyri, which were the forgeries that he had made. Next. Again, Simonides' motive was very clear because in 1859, Simonides was responsible for getting Simonides arrested in Germany. And he was also embarrassed in England when he tried to sell these forgeries elsewhere. Next. In the Journal of Sacred Literature, Cicero acknowledged that earlier in 1856, he had been responsible for exposing Simonides, and that's why Simonides used the opportunity to try to besmirch Tischendorf, but it failed because it was obviously false. Next. Also, in the text of the Shepherd of Hermas, there are corrections. That's explainable in the real world, not in Simonides' world. Next. Here we have a page of Hermas. As you can see, obviously, it's not in pristine condition. Next. Here again, we see what's left of the page of Hermas on another place. Next. Here's the piece that Uspensky took back to Russia. Now, at every point, these things are explained. The cancel sheets, the reinforced lettering. And by the way, about the binding was rebound after Tischendorf visited in 1844. And also, it was prepared for the British Library after they purchased it from Russia. So the binding, what you see today, that's new. We know it's new because we have records of it being new. Cockerell was the binder who did it. We have pictures of him doing it. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, so that is the closing statements. So basically now we go on to the audience questions. We've only had a couple. We might receive some as we go through. And if we don't get any more questions, then you two can continue on the conversation if you want to. If you need to leave, obviously we've got the set time now of around about 20 minutes, 25 minutes to finish this off, and that will be the conclusion. So the first question that we've got is, do you both agree with petitioning the British Museum for the C14 dating of Sinaiticus?
You go first, Stephen. Stephen can take this first. I'll take it a second.
Okay, Stephen, you're on mute at the moment, so...
Thank you, Gregory. Great question. The C14 dating would be good, but there are tests that are far better than that are designed to detect the history of parchment and ink. A group called BAM, I'm not going to give you the German acronym, out of Berlin, went to Leipzig in 2015, ready to do the tests upon their request. They had some inquiries about the manuscript. They were there, and then they were turned away the day that they arrived. This was related by Dr. Ira Rabin of this group BAM. And their tests are much more like what was done in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're far more exhaustive and non-destructive for the most part. I mean, it's much less non-destructive than even the better C14, which are now pretty non-destructive. So yes, they should be petitioned, but they should be petitioned for the type of tests that BAM out of Berlin did on the Dead Sea Scrolls, that they would do it on the Sinaiticus, and that might include C14. The problem is that they use the fact that C14 destroys a tiny bit of material as an out to avoid any testing. The British Library has been very clear on that. We can't do it because it's going to destroy a little bit of the manuscript. Okay, fair enough. Then do the other testing that BAM does. Okay, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay. Well, when it comes to carbon-14 tests, I'm perfectly fine with the British Museum using whatever test they want on their property, as well as the National Library of Russia, the library there at St. Catherine's Monastery, and the University Library in Leipzig. They all have parts of the manuscript. Any one of these could do tests. Now, bear in mind, though, that tests on just the parchment would not be enough, because if we did these tests and it came back with an old date, then guys like Stephen Avery and Bill Cooper and David Daniels and Chris Pinto would say, "Oh, yes, it's an old parchment because somebody said in his own writing that he got the parchment from an old book." So testing only the parchment would not settle anything. You have to also test the ink, which is another process.
You're right about the ink. They do an incredible test on the ink. Those can be even more important than the parchment. The problem with C14 is it always ends up being contentious, as it was in the Shroud of Turin, and then it just turned into a circus a little bit. These other tests are far more reliable on ink and parchment. I don't believe that the parchment on the Simonides story is more than about 500 years old, and there's a big difference between 1500 AD parchment and 450 AD parchment when it comes to testing. Okay? Go ahead. Thank you, Greg. Great question.
Okay, would you like another quick response, James, or is that if you finished there?
I think my early response covered it pretty well. To say that you would need to destroy some of the ink to make a new test. I can't speak for the British Library as far as their reasons.
Okay. The next question that we have is basically the same kind of question. It has come from Nick Sayers. Obviously, we know Nick. So his question for both: shouldn't Sinaiticus be scientifically examined, much like archaic Mark was, and proven to be a modern day forgery? So it's kind of on the basis of the same question. So if there is anything else you would like to add on to that, if there's anything you feel like you can add on to that, feel free.
That was the case. Archaic Mark, the ink was a major thing. They determined that he used something called Prussian blue, and that was a big part. That's why I'm saying a C14 would never tell you anything about that, but a good ink testing facility is needed, and a good parchment facility. and the Germans are the recommended ones in Berlin. But yes, but also archaic mark was also tripped up by textual aspects, that it was a Bultmann or Bultmann, one of them.
Butman.
Butman, yeah, his 1860 text. And I believe that we will find similar things as we look more at how the Coslinianus was used for Sinaiticus corrections, how Zosima was used to make, but it takes time, and we have to do it because the textual scholars are always run under the presupposition of the Tischendorf date. So they're unwilling to look at these questions with a tabula rasa, with a clean slate, and so we're doing that with the help of Kirk, who was on before, and others. We are looking to make up for the failings of the textual scholars who should have been looking at this years ago. Just to finish with one example, it was known that Zosima was said by, and James mentioned this, to be a source, but obviously it would have been a source for the Old Testament, and maybe possibly some of the
Well, if I may, in real life, it could not be a source for the Book of Tobit, because in Judith and Tobit, as Tischendorf pointed out way back in 1863, Tobit and Judith are from a different form of the book. So that could not be a source for those two books. And yet, in real life,
okay.
it is.
I'll accept that you may be right on that, but
wait. If you accept that I read over that, then how do you explain it?
Say again?
You can't.
Okay. Because of what? Because those two books are, what was your reason exactly?
Judith and Tobit are different forms of the text. They're not in the Codex A. They're in no source that Zosima had.
Well, does Zosima have those two books? I don't remember offhand. Does it have those two
Zosima
books?
had them, but not in the form in which Sinaiticus
Right.
has them.
Supposed to
As Tischendorf pointed out, I'll read from his
answer.
letter in 1863.
It's said to be a different volage, but that doesn't mean it wasn't used for corrections that you might find or something. But I would agree with you that we should not emphasize two books.
In 1863, this is what Tischendorf said. I'll just read it. In the Old Testament, the text of Judith and Tobit are quite a different recension, a recension still preserved principally in Old Latin and Old Syriac documents. How could this have been taken from the Old Maskell edition, or how can it be brought into it? It can be. So, Stephen, that's why one of many reasons that his claim could not hold up.
No, but you're missing a point that Benedict.
No, you're missing the point.
Okay, that Benedict worked on this for years and years and could have used Latin and Syriac sources. All you're pointing out is that Zosima would be a bad fit for those two. He even said, Simonides even mentions Syriac sources. So you're pointing out that Zosima would be a bad fit for those two books does not negate Syriac sources being used at Mount Athos, as mentioned by Simonides, from memory.
So a collation that was made within 2 years' time.
It only potentially negates Zosima being the source for those two books. But Zosima was not the only source. There were many sources. But what the point is this: if we look at Zosima and we look at Sinaiticus, and we can show relationships between omissions or between certain textual elements, but this has never been done. So we'll try to do it.
Stephen, let's review what somebody said. In 1839, they began the plan. By 1841, it was done. The writing of it was all done. That means the collation of it had to be done before that. So how much time do you think it would take to have the whole Old Testament and the New Testament and the Apostolic Fathers all collated, and then the task begins of actually writing the manuscript? You think that happens just like that? No, impossible. Impossible.
I don't understand. I read you the statement from Simonides before, where he talked about the long, extensive background of Benedict or Bessarion in preparing it. So that answers your question. You know, he didn't say that.
somebody said that the plan began in 1839, and then the collation, and then the writing, beginning in 1839, and then
you're missing,
done by 1841, right?
James. You're
Right.
missing the fact. You're missing the fact that it wasn't a one-step solution. Again, I'm going to read you this sentence from Benedict. Having removed to Athos, Mount Athos in 1810, embraced the monastic life. He was named Benedict. I'm skipping a little bit.
Hold on, Stephen.
While at Athos, let me finish this, please, James. While at Athos, he gave himself up particularly to the study of the sacred scripture. He collected the most ancient manuscripts of both testaments and their commentators, and at considerable expense prepared the work for the press. Okay? So that trumps any statement that sounds like I began the work in 1839, because there were stages to the work, and it began 10 years earlier by Benedict, including getting commentators.
Stephen, all you're doing is you're taking all this from Simonides. You're taking his word for it. Simonides is a chronic, habitual liar. You have any other source for any of this at all? Any other source? No, you don't.
If you claim that one statement from Simonides has to be cast in iron, that he began in 1839, it's perfectly proper to point out that he made it context much clearer when he talked about the long history of Benedict in preparation. Now, let me take you back, if you don't mind. I think we can drop that for now. Let me take you back to Ouspensky, because I'd like you to accept my correction. You pointed out that, and then I want to do the three courses note and a little back and forth. I want to explain why that's so important. But with Ouspensky, you said, look, he had a little piece of a fragment that he published, and that's true. I think he published in 1857. But I read to you how he mentioned the book of Hermas and Barnabas and the whole Old New Testament in 1845. So the fragment has no relevance in terms of what he saw of Hermas. What was relevant was what he saw in 1845. And it certainly sounds like he saw the whole book. Does that make sense now? And can you understand why I say that?
Sounds like he saw what same thing that Tischendorf saw.
Go ahead.
Tischendorf in 1844 advised the monks at St. Catherine's, if you see any more pages, be careful with them. Take care of them. The monks obviously had taken his advice, and when they had finished the manuscript pages they had, they put them all together. That was what Ouspensky saw only a little later. Ouspensky never said he saw the whole book of Hermas. He said he saw Hermas. When you have a third of a book, and say that's Hermas, that's all he said. He didn't say he saw the whole book. We don't have the whole book today.
Okay, but
he said he saw
that the fragment is
all that Ouspensky statement means is he saw text. Excuse me, my turn. All that Ouspensky said is he saw Barnabas and Hermas. Not that he saw the whole of Hermas. If Ouspensky saw a third of Hermas, that is all that is necessary to have his account. Right?
Okay. Right. Let me ask you a question, James. If you can read that three courses note again, which talks about pages being superfluous, it definitely reads like something that was done and at the time when the manuscript was written. In fact, they kept, I won't go into all the details, but the three courses note says that some of the pages are superfluous and not part of Ezra. So doesn't that have every appearance of being a note that was put in at the creation of the manuscript, whether it was 400 or 700 or 1800 or some other date? That note only makes sense as a note that was put in by the people who made the manuscript. I'm going to stop for a second, and then I want to continue. Does that make any sense to you? Can you sort of agree that it makes sense that this was a manuscript note? Your floor.
Okay. Regarding the note with three crosses, again, all you need to do is look in this and find, of course, I can't do it on the spot, but at leisure, those who do have the book, Read what D.C. Parker says about it. It is self-explanatory.
He doesn't. None of these writers touch on the simple fact that not Skeet, not Skeet and Milne, not Milne, not Lake, not any of them. Gregory, they don't touch on the fact that this reads like a note from the scriptorium. Tischendorf, in fact, writes as if it is a scriptorium note. It's a little cagey because it's hard to figure out, but his writing is that it was by A or B in either scribe. Okay, so you're not going to get anything from these books. You got to think this through on your own. You've got to read the note and think about it. And now my contention is simple, and I'll state it and leave it at that. This note was written in the scriptorium or the monastery, and this note cannot be earlier than about 700 AD. And this essentially proves that Sinaiticus is not a 4th century, that it has to have a terminus post quem of 700 AD or later. Okay, I just want to get that in.
Okay, my turn.
So important.
Stephen,
Yeah.
in the real world, Parker does comment about the note on page 66 through 67. And he says, the note tells us that 7 folios, 14 pages, are a repetition of text that had already been copied. Parker goes on at some length to explain the note.
Yes.
As a note added by correctors of the manuscript. The note is later, the text itself is not. The scribes did not notice the confusion. That is, the scribes who made the manuscript. The real scribes, not the imaginary world of Codex of Sinaiticus. The real scribes made a mistake and repeated this section of text. That is why the note is there. The in-house corrector, who certainly read this page, making 3 corrections before the leap and 2 after, did not notice it. It is even possible this page was checked by both A and D. Nobody marked it until a later corrector finally spotted the mistake. See pages 8. Oh, that's what the page I just showed you. How did they miss this piece of nonsense? And how the scribe copied 14 pages without noticing? The running titles to the repeated block of First Chronicles show that the scribe A thought he was copying 2nd Esdras, and since they were probably added later, he had 2 chances to notice the problem. We now have a better insight on what happened because part of the first copy of the text, also by scribe A, is among the new finds. Calculations of the missing pages show what happened. The two books of Chronicles were copied, as was First Esdras. Then the scribe copied 2nd Esdras until, when he got to 9:9, he copied a block of text from First Chronicles 6:57 to 19:17. It is often said that the most likely explanation is that the exemplar from which A was copying contained a block of text which had come from elsewhere. Perhaps it was acquired from another part of the manuscript, or from another manuscript which got bound in the wrong place. The fact is that 7 folios in Codex Sinaiticus might make it likely that it comprised a whole choir in a manuscript with a smaller size. And he goes on from there. I think that is quite enough to show that Parker does comment on it, and he does say it is a corrector's note and has no such implication like the one you are suggesting. All right?
That last sentence, what was the adjective that you used? It is a what note? What did you say? It is a
corrector's note that was added by later copiers, but it has no such implication like the one that you've been suggesting.
well, that's I understand that's a theory, but it makes
sorry,
no
I was
sense.
on mute. That is basically the time up. I know that we've actually gone over the time that James had originally said that he wanted to stay, because we did the extra, obviously the intro, and then we did also the extra 5 minutes each in that opening. So we have actually gone over time. I'm obviously we can continue on, but James, I know that you said that you wanted it to be kind of a bit more strict set time. So if you're ready to go, then you need to leave. Then we'll finish up here. It has been a really interesting conversation. I wasn't so strict with the times, especially during the conversation, the questions, because of it was more a conversational debate rather than specific debate type thing. And I wanted to allow you to continue on the conversation between yourselves. I think it's been a really edifying conversation between you. I really thank you both for being here and presenting the information that you've presented. I think you've both presented information that needs to be looked at by the people that are watching this. And you've really, I wasn't set when I came into this on which side that I had fallen on. And I don't think that I've actually jumped off the fence at the moment. I'm going to go back and rewatch all the information that you've presented and see which way that I actually align with this. But thank you both for being here and presenting what you have. It's been a really good conversation. And if there's anything that you'd just like to say before you both leave, you feel free to do so.
Thank you for wonderful hosting. Thank you for Kirk coming in and sharing, and my teammates like who have pioneered this question, Chris Pinto, David Daniels, Mark Mishi. Thank you to all of them as well, and some others. Thank you. But good job, LJ, and I appreciate you did a great job as a host.
Yeah, it's the first debate that I've done, and I know that we weren't really so strict with the debate. It was a bit more debate conversation, but I think you both got kind of equal time, especially in the at the beginning with the openings and stuff as well. So again, thank you very much for being here, Stephen. James.
Yes. In closing, as we've seen, all the evidence that we see in the manuscript and all that we know about the career of Simonides shows he was lying. So there's no reason to take his accounts seriously. The question is not, was Tischendorf entirely true, entirely accurate, and truthful? The question is there any objective evidence for the claims of Simonides? And the answer is, as we've seen, there is not a scrap. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you for hosting. Bye.
You're welcome. Thank you very much again for everybody that has watched and has been in and out. And obviously this video will be available on my channel for evermore now. So obviously if you are watching this on a replay, thank you very much for taking the time to watch it. You can go to Stephen's website and James's website. If you'd just like to say your websites, just so that there is a link in the description, but if you would just like to say your websites, just to give a bit of a plug, if anybody would like to go and get some information from your own websites.
For me, the simplest is to come to Facebook and come to a group called Pure Bible, one word, or go to www.purebibleforum.com. Either one. You know, if you're not sure, put a little note in the YouTube and we'll take it from there.
Okay.
All right. On Facebook, I am an administrator at NT Textual Criticism. That is a group that normally does not engage in conspiracy theories like this one, but we do examine textual criticism, and we do allow a number of different views to be expressed. Also, I have a blog, thetextofthegospels.com, and at my church, I have a corner of that website that is curtisvillecc.com, and people can go there to see some more things that I've written about Codex Sinaiticus.
Okay, awesome. And like I say, there is a link to both of those websites in the description of this video. So again, thank you very much, Stephen and James, for participating and for being cordial and respecting each other and giving yourselves the time to answer the questions. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and I will look forward to seeing you on our next video. And again, if you'd like to get involved in a debate, please feel free to contact me, and we'll get it sorted, and we'll get it put up onto this channel. It is something that I'm looking forward to doing more of in the future, probably a little bit more official as I get more and more used to it. So thank you very much, and a pleasant day for the rest of you.
God bless. Amen.
Okay.
Blessings in Jesus. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Okay. Bye, James.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, so thank you very much again for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. It will keep you up to date when I do more videos. The debates is something that I am looking at wanting to host a little bit more on the channel, but obviously I may be a little bit more official than what we've done today. I was a little bit more lenient with the time wise, because they actually said that it was going to be a bit more discussion-y. Although there was set times, I did allow them to go past that and actually just discuss them between them, because that was kind of arranged beforehand. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.